Hello Bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. Today I'm here with my March reading wrap-up. March was a spectacular reading month for me. I really connected with everything that I managed to read, and I actually read some books that have been on my TBR to-read list for a very long time now. The first book I officially finished in the month of March was The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. I actually discussed this book in a few videos now, including my belated February wrap-up, so I'm going to refer you there to hear my thoughts on that book, and I have a lot of other books to rave about, so I don't want to simply repeat those thoughts for you now. The next book I finished in the month of March was Golden Hill by Francis Spufford. This book is historical fiction set in Manhattan, 1746. A stranger named Mr. Smith arrives fresh off the boat with an order for £1,000, and he won't explain why or what he is planning to do in the colonies that requires so much money. Should the New York merchants trust him? Should they risk their credit and refuse him? Should they befriend him, seduce him, arrest him, maybe even kill him? This book was a whirlwind of an adventure that just continued to pick up momentum as it went. It was full of surprises, and it's maybe the only book I've read where the last few pages truly changed my perception of the text as a whole. The book is expertly constructed and clearly and consciously takes so much inspiration from the tradition of the 18th century novel. And I have to admit that part of the fun for me was hearing all of the street names and places and being familiar with their present-day counterparts in New York City. They mention the Broadway, like two separate words, Broadway, which is obviously, Broadway in New York City now. And it mentions Trinity Church, which is a real church that I've walked by in New York City. And it's just so interesting to think of the New York City I know, the city that never sleeps, as this small town that the main character keeps stating is really tiny and much cleaner than London. Anyway, this book is wonderful and an absolute must-read for any historical fiction fan. And then I read Revenge by Yoko Ogawa on the recommendation of Katie from Books and Things. I think this was the best collection of short stories that I have ever read. It was also the creepiest and most disturbing and macabre set of short stories that I've ever read. The collection's actually quite short, about 150 pages, but I had to read it over multiple sittings because the stories were just so disturbing. And yet I wanted to keep going because they're all so subtly and beautifully woven together. And I didn't want to forget the previous story or I'd miss the link between the stories. And they are all connected by the most bizarre plot points. An entire post office full of kiwis, carrots that grow in the shape of hands, the death of a Bengal tiger, a dead hamster. These stories are full of odd, gruesome details, told in a calm, quiet, matter-of-fact tone. The tone, combined with the subject matter, made the overall stories even more unnerving. Do you know that phrase, exquisite corpse? It's that game where you make a communal short story and everyone goes around in a circle and each person adds something to the short story, having only seen what the last person wrote. I can't quite explain why, but this collection really reminds me of that concept. Anyway, I don't feel like I'm doing the best job of explaining how amazing this collection is, but I just want to shove this short story collection into everyone's hands. There truly wasn't a single story that I wasn't captivated by, and I absolutely need to read more Yoko Ogawa soon. And then my audiobook that I listened to on my commute to work this month was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which was a reread for me. It was narrated by Rosamund Pike, who I thought really brought this book to life with her voice. Pride and Prejudice is one of my all-time favorite books, partially because every time I revisit it, I take away something new from the text. Many of you probably already know the premise of Pride and Prejudice or have even read it before, but I suppose for those of you who don't, it's about a strongly opinionated, witty, and independent woman named Elizabeth Bennet and her 5 sisters, at least one of which must marry rich in order to secure financial stability and support for the family. On this reading, I particularly paid attention to Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their relationship. Mrs. Bennet is an anxious, nervous wreck, and the way that Mr. Bennet handles her and stressful situations by simply poking fun at her and everyone around him is hysterical and something that I definitely overlooked in the first two readings of Pride and Prejudice. And then, of course, it was fun revisiting this book for the usual revulsion of Mr. Collins and the relationship between Jane and Lizzie and just Lydia in general and the relationship between Lizzie and her father. And there's just so much brilliant stuff in this book. It's an absolute delight to read, and I highly recommend a reread if you guys haven't read it or reread it in a while. Next up, I read The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. The premise of this book was absolutely brilliant. Four siblings in 1969 New York City meet with an old psychic woman who tells them individually the date that they'll die. Then, in a novel divided into 4 sections, one for each sibling, we see how their lives unfold and how the woman's predictions shape and inform their futures. This book weaves together gypsies and fortune-telling and magic of the illusionist variety, like magic tricks, that type of thing, and religion, specifically Judaism. It's a novel about fate and agency, about family and independence, about guilt and forgiveness. Each of the siblings' stories are very different, but I was compelled by all of them. I absolutely loved Clara's character and the scenes in which she describes her fascination with magic. I'm going to read you a quote from her section. When Clara plucks a coin from inside someone's ear or turns a ball into a lemon, she hopes not to deceive, but to impart a different kind of knowledge, an expanded sense of possibility. The point is not to negate reality, but to peel back its scrim, revealing reality's particularities and contradictions. The very best magic tricks, the kind Clara wants to perform, do not subtract from reality. They add. And the last book that I finished this month was actually featured in my spring TBR, so I'm excited I actually got around to reading at least one of those books, and I finished it on the very last day of March, and that was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This was a brilliant book in that it tackles so much successfully in so little space. It has themes of friendship, love, what it means to be human, knowledge. Is it better to be kept in the dark and live in innocence, or is it better to be informed and aware of the world around you and the fate that awaits you? It's part stunning literary fiction, part sci-fi, part mystery, part coming of age, or rather a reflection on childhood and on the experience of coming of age. It truly has something for every reader, and it is just so easy to read. The language is simple, but neither too succinct nor too flowy. It has this power to just suck you in completely and utterly. The writing was mesmerizing, lulling even. Ishiguro's descriptions are unique and resonated really well with me. I'll give you an example. I think of my pile of old paperbacks, their pages gone wobbly, like they'd once belonged to the sea. So nothing about that description is complicated, nor are wet books and a connection to the sea a particularly unique sentiment, but the way that Ishiguro phrases it, I can just vividly picture exactly what those books must look like, and his writing for me just works like that. The characters he builds are complex and vivid, and the relationships that he builds between the characters are powerful and realistic. In some respects, though, I do feel like the book failed to deliver. The big plot reveal that the first half of the book was building up to wasn't really much of a reveal at all. It had been pieced together for me throughout the book, and it's explicitly stated on the back cover, the inside cover in this copy. When I finally got answers with regards to the plot, they were more like clarifications rather than drastic plot reveals, which is fine, except for the fact that the first half of the book seemed to be building up to this suspenseful big reveal that just never really came. And once the characters learned more about their situation, I felt that they passed no judgment on their circumstances or the state of the world they lived in. They didn't try to change their fate or fight the system in any particularly notable way. The plot was simply about them seeking explanations and just accepting them. I felt that there was much more that the characters could have done within the existing plot, but in some ways this was more realistic. Many people in their situation, I think, would have stopped questioning and resolved to accept circumstances like the characters did. Not everyone is cut out to be a revolutionary, I suppose. Anyway, the book left me pondering all of these big philosophical questions without really providing any answers, and in some respects I think that that's okay. It leads to further discussion and thinking, and this book is definitely one that I will be thinking about for a long time to come. So that is all that I read in the month of March. I would love to hear everything that you read in the month of March. What were your favorite reads? Have you read any of these books? Did you agree with me? What did you think about them? I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see you guys in another video soon. Bye!